expect that the mind is having somewhere around 50 to 60,000 thoughts every single day, which is just an astronomical number to wrap your head around. But where it gets really interesting is not in the sheer volume, it's in the fact that a lot of those thoughts, different research suggests maybe 80 to 90% of those 50 to 60,000 thoughts are the same thoughts as they were yesterday. So you can see how we can very, very quickly get caught on loops. So the things that you tell yourself over and over and over again, and the kind of narrative that's running in the background that's being driven by an ego or an identity or even subconsciously, that is starting to program yourself. Because if you're not aware of your self-talk, that's one thing, but your mind is, and your mind is always eavesdropping on your self-talk.
You're listening to The Foundation of Wellness, a refreshing take on diet and lifestyle. Join me, Marisa Moon, as we tackle modern health with innovative and ancient principles. I'm a certified primal health coach and intermittent fasting instructor at marisamoon.com. Well, hey, it's me, Marisa, your host today on The Foundation of Wellness. Thank you so much for being here. I really love getting to know the listeners, so be sure to join me in my Facebook group, The Foundation of Wellness, so we can talk about the episodes and the things that you're liking and what you want to hear and what you're going through. It's so cool to meet you guys online or even in the reviews. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts and can leave us a review, I'd love to know what you're thinking. I always drop that Facebook link in the show notes and episode description. It's facebook.com/groups/FOW podcast. And it's called The Foundation of Wellness, just like this show. Today's interview is really enlightening. I think anybody can relate to this because we're talking about self-talk, the little voice inside our heads that actually repeats itself over and over and over, which we learned some crazy facts about today, and how to catch it. How this negative self-talk is really getting in the way and sabotaging us and making us think that we're a victim and making us identify with that, we hear an incredible story about Steve's upbringing and his mother, who recently lost over 100 pounds when she was ready to transition to a primal and ancestral diet and lifestyle. Isn't that incredible? He then gets into explaining the trouble with negative self-talk and really just how that ends up filtering and infiltrating everything in our life. It's like crazy how much it creates an identity for us and we don't even really realize it. At the end, Steve gets into how we can use this in moments of really trying circumstances. How to deal with it when we really are the victim, like so many people are right now because of this pandemic. And we even talk about times when you feel depressed or hopeless. It's easy to say we should change our negative self-talk, but how? What can really get you through that when you're feeling that negative? And I think you're going to leave this interview feeling really refreshed and optimistic. I just loved it, and I hope you do too. And you're going to get to know Steve better, who is a holistic health coach from Peak Primal Health. He helps people build lifelong habits that create emotionally, physically, spiritually strong human beings. And he helps people to realize and step into their true potential by optimizing their nutrition, their movement, their lifestyle, and their mindset totally, and their spiritual connection. He is a pretty deep dude, but totally relatable and really fun to talk to about this kind of stuff. I think you're going to love it. Here we go. Hey, Steve, it's awesome to finally have you on the Foundation of Wellness. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me on. I'm very excited to chat today.
Oh, good. You've got a lot to share. You're really wise. I don't know where that comes from, but dude, you've got some serious depth. I like that about you.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was a past life thing or something, like the wise old elder. I'm trying to embody that now in my, grow out my beard and pretend to be all wise and stuff like that. So hopefully I can pass some of that wisdom on today in this podcast.
Oh, I'm sure. If I could just get your voiceover to play with the email messages that you send, that would be perfect.
I know.
Your accent just brings it all to life. I love it.
I love it.
Why don't you tell our audience real quick, a quick story about how you got so into health?
Yeah, so my journey into health, I guess, was one of desperation more than anything else, and that really became my motivation to figure some stuff out. I had a lot of I didn't have a good relationship with myself growing up, and I, watched my mom go through chronic yo-yo dieting, and I was self-conscious. So like a lot of my self-worth was kind of being tied to weight, and I was body conscious. And around 13 or 14 years old, I managed to lose some of the puppy fat, as we call it in England, and start to feel a bit better in my own skin, and that kind of spurred me on to keep the momentum going. But I was kind of coming from this place of like fear, because a lot of my family was sick, and I watched aunties, uncles, and grandparents all die far too young from chronic lifestyle factors. So it was that desperation that spurred me on to say, if I don't change something, I'm gonna follow suit, because we have this belief, especially in our modern culture, that your genes are what really set you up here. And I had genes, cancer, heart disease, you name it. So I was like, what have I got to do to kind of take charge here? And stumbled upon the work of our godfather Mark Sisson, the founder of the Primal Blueprint, and just happened to come across that work, and it pretty much changed my life. The first step for a lot of people was removing grains and realizing that, wow, that really shifted some things for me at that time.
Grains, you said. You're talking about the food grains.
Yeah, the food grains, like the gluten containing grains. And I was an athlete at the time, and I was competing in mixed martial arts and training like a professional 6 days a week, 2 times a day, but didn't really look like a professional athlete. Was still carrying some extra weight, was still not recovering very well, despite doing all of the conventional things perfectly. So to find Mark's work and how he went against the grain, no pun intended, was really eye-opening for me. And that spurred me on then to learn as much as I could about things low carb, things ancestral, things paleo, things primal, you name it. And yeah, really took charge of my own health. And I guess what you would call my first client became my mom. And she is now down like 120 pounds and a completely different person because of those principles. So it's been a journey since then. But yeah, that was the introduction. Yeah, it's amazing.
Amazing.
It was amazing.
How long did it take for your mother to take interest and make that type of change?
A while,
to start,
actually.
Taking on.
Yeah, a while, because it is so against conventional wisdom. And like I said, when I was growing up, and she was kind of doing the Weight Watchers thing, and I saw slim fast shakes, I saw it all, but I didn't see anything that looked like an ancestral kind of approach that was not demonizing fat, and not talking about just chronic calorie restriction and killing yourself in the gym. So these are all the methods that she tried. So when I was doing something completely different, it didn't really make sense to her. But I guess you start to model that, and you start to model what health looks like, and you pique people's curiosity. And eventually it was kind of like, all right, let's try this thing that you're doing, tell me what to do. And I think every ounce of a being was rejecting it, because I was like, don't fear the fat, maybe we switch up and we de-emphasize the carbohydrates, and you can eat meat and all of these things, which to her were just new concepts, but results start speaking for themselves. And she just had like these really big changes in weight and psoriasis and energy. And then she became a big proponent of this way of living after years of being failed by the conventional wisdom. So it was really, really cool.
Oh man, that's so powerful. Good for you, man. Someone you care about as much as your own mother. It's tremendous. Well, today we're talking about things that already I was thinking of in your story. The way that we talk to ourselves in our minds, sometimes like unknowingly, we don't even recognize or hear the voice until we start to really just call it out and identify it, thanks to a coach or some great self-help book or a therapist or something. So we want to talk about that voice in our heads that kind of stops us from making changes for the better, or from being the person who we could possibly be, or create the life that we could possibly want. And even take it to the level of self-sabotage, the ways that we stop ourselves from doing something every single time it looks like an experience in our past. And when you were telling your story, instead of feeling defeated by your family's history and your genetics, people go in one of two directions, right?
Yeah.
They either are like, I'm doomed. This just how it is. My whole family has it. I'm going to die at a young age, so I'm just going to live it up. Or like you used it to empower you, and you believed in your ability to change. And it sounds like your mother had to get to that point too, where she truly believed that she could do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's almost a comfort in that that we let our kind of self-talk dictate and hold us back, because it's what we fall into this trap of playing the victim, right? Like that, this isn't my fault, this is just my genes, this is just my circumstance, I am this way because maybe a person left me or I got fired from my job, and we blame and complain. But the problem with that is it's a little trick of the ego that likes to blame and complain, so we don't have to take responsibility, because if we don't take responsibility, it's not our fault. So that temporarily feels good. But the problem with that over the long term is it's going to stop you fulfilling your potential, because when you are stuck in the victim narrative, you are powerless to change. Victims have no power because they're at the mercy of the circumstances. So there has to come a point, whether that's via divine inspiration or desperation or whatever it is, that you choose to take responsibility. And that's fundamentally the difference between people that have success. And I'm talking success not in terms of like cars and bank accounts. I'm talking success in terms of like how you feel internally and creating what you want for yourself. Those people are the people that take responsibility, and they understand that a lot of stuff has happened to you, and that is really hard, and it's not necessarily your fault, but it is your responsibility. Yes, you might have all of this stuff going on, not your fault, right? Life happens. Things are hard. But what are you going to do with that? That's your responsibility. How are you going to show up? What are you going to do with all of these excuses and these things that are holding you back? Are you going to let them rule your life, or are you going to look to work through them and with them and conquer them? And that is where a great deal of growth can happen.
Totally. I think the victim mentality is kind of hard to recognize within yourself.
Very.
And I don't know why that is. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what that's like and how we can recognize it?
Yeah. So the reason the victim mentality is very hard to identify is it's very sneaky in the fact that it doesn't show up as self-sabotaging, because what it's really rooted in is this kind of scarcity, survival, lower self kind of mindset that is there fundamentally to protect you. It prevents you from really taking risks or opening up or doing something different, because it doesn't want you to either feel like a failure or be rejected again or be wounded. And that has been something that has probably been programmed in you at some point along your journey. And it could have been when you was 5 years old. It could have been when you was 35 years old. It could have been yesterday. It could have been 20 years ago. But at some point you did something, and you did that behavior as a means of survival. And when I say survival, I'm not necessarily talking life or death. I'm talking about the need to be seen, the need to feel loved, the need to fit in, the need to be not seen. These are all different things, what different people go through. So at that time, it served a purpose, and it protected you, and it made you feel safer. And I call that like an emotional kind of suit of armor. So you put on one layer of armor, and that protected you, and it served its job very, very well. However, what happens then when we're 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, but we're still wearing that suit of armor? We never took it off. So it's then keeping us safe still, or it's telling us that it's keeping us safe. So in the short term, that doesn't really show up very, it's not sabotaging in the way it shows up, because again, it's rooted in safety and security. But the tricky nature of that is, in the short term, trying to protect you, it's often limiting you in the long term from, breaking through your own plateaus, or really going after what you want, because that just plants that little seed of doubt, or it tells you that, no, don't do that thing, because, remember that time you failed, that was really painful, and you don't want to do that again. So it kind of shows up, and it's very, very sneaky in the way that it shows up. So it takes a level of awareness to catch it when it's there, because if you're not looking for it, you'll pretty much never realize that it's at play. But with almost everybody, it usually is running in the background, trying to fundamentally protect you. So it's a tricky one to navigate.
Yeah, I've never really thought of myself as having a victim mindset until I was working with a business coach, and I realized like this message I keep telling myself, like, poor me, I'm terrible at this, or this is just so hard for me. Every time it happens, I can't do it, so I don't. And I'm thinking also about the people who I work with as a health coach. You probably see this a lot too. The victim mentality tends to be like, say it was a woman in her 50s, her children are grown now, and they already are starting their own families, and she's maybe alone at home or with a husband, and they just feel a little bit lonely.
Yeah.
And she doesn't really know that it's related, but that's why she's snacking more and eating so many different times throughout the day of little things and never feeling satisfied. And I think it's often this victim mindset that's like, poor me, I'm alone, I'm lonely, I have nothing to do or no purpose, and this food gives me comfort. Do you think that those are related, like the victim mindset and that type of scenario?
Totally. I think you're onto something there, because I think fundamentally, if we look at what stops us transitioning out of the victim mindset, or the lower self into kind of that fullest expression of ourselves, the higher self, is the identity we cling to. Because that identity we cling to comes with a lot of baggage if we can't separate from that. So the great example is of, that person who had their identity tied to being the mother through and through, and that was who she was, and that's how she defined herself and her self-worth. And now all of a sudden, her responsibilities have somewhat been removed because the kids have flown the coop. Now, if she ties up all of her worth and her identity as the mother, and she's no longer playing the mother, there's a void. And that void is it needs to consciously be filled by transitioning out of just I am this thing and only this thing. Otherwise, we will end up trying to fill the void, whether that's through mouth pleasure, or sometimes that can be sabotage. It can be so many things. So it's very tricky. But I think fundamentally, yes, you're onto something there, and I think that's what it is. There's a lot to do with the identity that we cling to, and that is usually something we've learned over a long time based on self-talk and things like that. So yeah, you're spot on.
How much does self-talk and self-sabotage have to do with our identity or our ego? I mean, I'm very familiar with the phrase ego in the sense of like Buddhist philosophy and things. It really resonates with me. But I think a lot of people hear ego and they just think pride, or that sense of ego that we've used in socially in our language. But really, identity is a great way to describe that, because we may not be able to articulate the way that we identify ourselves, but the voice in our head sure can. And it has many ideas of who we are and what we do and how we act. And talk a little bit about that, how our identity comes into play there.
Yeah, so our identities, often will be radically shaped by our self-talk, fundamentally, and a lot of these things that we see growing up are things that maybe are installed in us through enculturation and expectations, maybe things that were modeled to us. But I think the self-talk piece is important here to understand, because that is fundamentally kind of the driver of your ship, if you will. And so many people are unconscious to their self-talk, and it's pretty powerful when you think of it in this respect, that the mind is having somewhere around 50 to 60,000 thoughts every single day, which is just an astronomical number to wrap your head around. But where it gets really interesting is not in the sheer volume; it's in the fact that a lot of those thoughts, different research suggests maybe 80 to 90% of those 50 to 60,000 thoughts are the same thoughts as they were yesterday. So you can see how we can very, very quickly get caught on loops. So the things that you tell yourself over and over and over again, and the kind of narrative that's running in the background that's being driven by an ego or an identity, or even subconsciously, that is starting to program yourself. Because if you're not aware of your self-talk, that's one thing, but your mind is, and your mind is always eavesdropping on your self-talk. So those things that are running in the background, they are being programmed in. So I like to see the mind kind of like a supercomputer that you are constantly programming with your self-talk. And if you're, programming good code and all is sunshine and rainbows, you're going to have a machine that works very, very well. But if you're programming bad code, which might look like negative self-talk or these ideas that aren't in congruence with who you really are or what you really want, then you are programming negative code or bad code. And what happens to computers with bad code? They run viruses. And I don't think we realize oftentimes that the virus in our own computers is ourselves. And that's quite a harsh realization, because a lot of times it's, this is what I'm doing to myself through a process of, unconsciousness. So if we fight for our limitations, we get to keep them. So those little ideas that come up like, I'm too fat, I'm too old, I'm broken, I have this, that, and the other, I'm a failure, I can't be loved. Every time we say that, whether we're conscious of it or not, it becomes a reality. And that shapes our physical world. It shapes our material world. So it's very, very important to try and get a grasp of what this kind of language means and how it's running, and become aware of your self-talk, because it's literally programming who you are and how your life is manifesting. And I think that's very, very powerful.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you repeat the number of thoughts that you said we experience like 2 days in a row or whatever?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's 50 to 60,000 thoughts every single day, and 80 to 90% of those are the same thoughts as they were yesterday.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's remarkable. So the messaging really matters. I mean, the things
it really does.
Okay, so that's what we need to talk about next, is how. How do you help people identify the self-talk that's going on in their minds?
Yeah, yeah. So fundamentally, we have to figure out a way to cultivate more awareness of what's going on. That's the first step. Now, there's many tools you can use here. No, there's of course you can sit on the mat and you can meditate and you can start to watch how your mind does these things. But what about, how we translate this to general daily life? How do we cultivate more awareness in general daily life? Because a lot of that is going to give us insights into our mind. So the first thing to do is go looking for ants, 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 and kill them. You have to kill ants. And what does ants stand for? Automatic negative thoughts. So you got to kill the ants. So when you catch yourself and watch your mind working, these automatic negative thoughts that pop up instantaneously when you're put in a situation, recognize it and kill it and start to reprogram it. So you might be, it might be a work thing and you get a deadline that comes through and it's 48 hours away. And immediately the first thing you think is, I can't get that done in that time. Or like, I'm not smart enough to do that. Maybe you get told that you have to do a presentation and you hate public speaking. And the first thing you say is, oh, I can't do this. I hate public speaking. Like those things just come up automatically. But get curious about them. Why? Is there actually any evidence that those things are truth, or are they just something you've been telling yourself potentially for decades? Because maybe you did a presentation in school when you were 10 years old and you stuttered some words and somebody laughed at you and that really wounded you. So now here you are, a 40-year-old successful person who has to give a presentation, and you're still telling yourself that you hate public speaking, but it might not necessarily actually be the case. And there's no real evidence for that because you're a very, very different person now. So by getting curious about these automatic negative thoughts and looking to become aware of them, edit them, audit them, delete them, change the narrative, you can actually take a hold of a lot of and harness a lot of potential and power. And you can just get creative with your language. One of my things is to put yet at the end of a sentence. So like, I'm not strong, or can become like, well, I'm not strong enough yet. But the first phrase is very definitive and very self-defeating. And the second phrase is very empowering. And it's like, oh, I get to create strength. So there's a bunch of ways. Fundamentally, the most important thing is to bring about more awareness. How you do that is going to look different for different people. And you can have a dedicated practice, like a meditation, like a mindfulness-based practice. Or you can live in meditation, where you are constantly reminding yourself to watch the workings of your mind. And it is a skill and it is a muscle. And the more you do this, the easier it will get. And then you won't have to focus as hard to catch yourself, because you might have all the best intentions to watch the inner workings of your mind and then go a whole day and say, oh, I didn't pay any attention whatsoever. Yeah. But you just keep showing up and do the practice. And eventually you start to become much more aware of that passenger that is with you, the ego, the thoughts, the incessant stream, and understand this amazing realization that you are not your thoughts, you are the one that hears them. And from that place, now you're on the precipice of a great inner journey, and that's one that can radically shift somebody's life.
Totally, I can see that now, and I'm wondering if it's almost like something you got to put to paper, because the mind is so fluid and fast moving and dynamic that it's like trying to run a list in your mind. Yeah. It's like it's going to burn energy. It's not going to be as organized or effective unless you just get it out of your head. And do you have to do that with clients who you're helping recognize their self-talk? Is there any kind of like tangible exercise or something that they need to do to start really recognizing this?
Yeah, I have almost all of them start some kind of journaling practice for sure. Okay. And I like, both reflective journaling and then just kind of prompted journaling and free flow journaling, even just the idea, and this is very powerful, of just setting a 10-minute timer and putting pen to paper, and you're just not allowed to let your hands start moving for that 10 minutes. And some people, they're like, I have nothing to say, but just write. And you'll start to see that a lot of stuff comes out. I don't know where that's coming from, whether it's subconsciously or whatever, but what we can start to do when we make this a practice is look for reoccurring themes that come up consistently. So journaling is a really, really important tool. And I am a very big proponent, and I push my clients to develop a meditation practice, something that's even as simple as 10 minutes a day, sit and just watch, just observe your mind. And when you get lost in thought, don't judge that and feel like you're bad at meditation, because that's everybody. Your mind thinks like the heart beats. It's an automatic process. The goal of meditation is simply to see when you are thinking and you're lost in that train of thought, to go, that's interesting. Let me come back to breath, or let me come back to the mantra, or whatever that is. So a combination, in my opinion, of journaling and meditating are the two kind of big bang for your buck, kind of tools you can add to your toolkit to really get you aware and comfortable with your mind and your self-talk.
Yeah, those are great recommendations. And I think, I just started reading Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. And it's because 10% Happier, his first book about meditation, was what got me into meditation. And he has a 10% Happier app. And he said in the beginning, he thought, there's no point in meditating unless you're doing it like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And he does it 2 hours a day. He finally started realizing with the app that he had and the tour he was going on to try and get the world to meditate, that even 1 minute is good, because right now we're doing none. And I really loved that, because I know what it's like to hear the word meditation and automatically put up a wall.
Yeah.
I know what that's like, to be almost turned off by the idea of it and say, that's not me. Yeah. Which, by the way, is our ego talking. And I think that being still for a moment without any other stimuli, like without headphones, music, TV, or your phone or a magazine, is like something most people don't even experience one time throughout the day. Like not when they're standing in line at the store, not when they're eating. I was on a group coaching call, and one person said that they enjoy eating now with no stimuli except the food, and they've used that as their meditation time. Yeah, and 3 people were asking questions about it, like, wait, what? You just eat and don't do anything? And then he was explaining it, and one of them said, I could never do that. I would be bored out of my mind. And I was like, I know, that's how far removed we are from being with our thoughts in that way. And wow, it's so important to experience that at some point.
Yeah, you're so spot on. And I think there is like that resistance that you feel, and a lot of people will feel when they hear this and, oh, meditating, I could never do that. I'm not good at meditating. Again, ego, there's a self-limiting thought straight away, right? But to understand that when you feel resistance, there's almost always some gold there. There's the idea of Joseph Campbell, the cave you fear to enter has the treasure you need the most. So for a lot of people, there's a lot of resistance to this meditation because they're convinced that the mind races, and they fundamentally don't want to be with themselves. They don't want to hear all of that. And maybe there's a bit of fear and there's a resentment there or whatever it is, but there's gold there too. There's a treasure that you really need, especially in today's modern world where we are hardwired for distraction, and a lot of people don't have any of that working in time, and we're so focused on doing. I'm just going to be stressed, and I'm going to work productivity as a badge of honor, and we've lost the art of being still and cultivating awareness and gratitude, and those things are a gift, a true gift in today's modern world. And your ability to not just constantly look to distract, but instead get curious about nature, and when I say nature, not just the outside world, but the nature of self too, and the nature of your mind. These are I think paramount skills in today's world, especially in light of something like coronavirus and this forced slowdown. Now it is forced in many senses. Many people have been forced to get still. Now are they going inwards and getting curious about themselves during this time, or are they further distracting and further consuming? And the two can have remarkably different results. You can really use this as an opportunity to get curious about that stuff, and it will be a skill that needs to be trained, and it is a practice, but it can stay with you and massively benefit your life. So I'm with you. I was a rugby player and then a cage fighter. So I was, as tough guy, alpha male, pretend to be, not into any of that woo-woo hippie stuff. I was that guy. But then I tried it, right? Because I realized that there's value in doing things that make you uncomfortable. And I've not missed a day meditating in almost 2 years. So it was a game changer for me. Wow. And I encourage people to really give it a shot.
I do too. And I think a great way to kind of wrap up this conversation today would be to recognize that there are people living right now in a true victim reality, and they are going through some really hard times. There are some people especially going through financially difficult times, and there's just so much anxiety based around the future for you and your family, or for your health, or for us as a people, as a collective. And so how can we use this idea of self-talk and just kind of getting us through difficult times when some of it is based in truth?
Yeah, that's again, the really tricky thing about a lot of these these issues that arise is that they are truths. It is hard, and there is malevolence in the world, and people we love die, and we lose jobs, and like those things are real. So it's not this airy furry woo woo, just no, let's pretend they're not and everybody be happy. There's some real work to be done. I think where we really need to harness the power of this again comes back to that conversation of, can we take responsibility? Can we really understand that life is happening for us, not to us? Because I think you have to look at it that way. Otherwise, you will drown in the victimhood of these things. But if you can kind of understand that life is happening for you, and you can take responsibility and you can look for the lesson, then everything becomes an opportunity to grow a little bit, or get a little bit better, or find a little bit more about who you are and purpose. And that doesn't mean that life is going to be sunshine and rainbows, but it's taking control of the most fundamental of the human faculties, which is what you tell yourself and what goes on between your ears, because the outside world can be very, very cruel, but no one can really take away how you see that and what you tell yourself about that. And that is a conscious choice, in my opinion, once it becomes conscious. Now, that is really important to understand, to have a bit of forgiveness for yourself, and understand that it's okay if you've been a victim before. We all have, and we're very good at doing it. But to commit to yourself to take responsibility now, to ask what's important now, and how I really show up, and how am I going to start moving the needle on this stuff, because you'll really find out what you're made of when you can stir some of life's hardships in the face and still put one foot in front of the other in a responsible and empowered way. And I think everybody can do that, even when life is really shitty and things are hitting the fan. But we can all do that. But it has to be a choice, and we've got to be willing to kind of trudge through the mud sometimes.
Yeah, it may feel like, because I recently went through a brief depression, and it can really feel like you do not have the capacity or interest to be the one to make change in your life, or to consider hope in your circumstance. And there wasn't even really anything going wrong with me. So, you just feel like an even bigger loser, because you're like, I don't have anything to complain about, yet still here I am. And I think what we can take from the lesson you just taught us, and that experience of being so hopeless, is to remember that times ebb and flow in life. Through all tragedy comes a better time, and it will always change, whether you are the one to change it or not. The sun going up and going down over and over and over will eventually change your circumstance. And so even if the word hope is not something that resonates with you, or you're having a difficult time changing that message in your mind, just to remember that nothing in life is constant.
Yeah.
And that no matter what, in a day or a week or a year, it will definitely be different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was our boy the Buddha that said change is the only universal constant. Everything is always changing. And he also said that attachment is the root of all suffering. And what he really meant was, what we do so often as humans is we wish things a different way. So when we're stuck in a funk and life is really hard, the reason we have so much suffering in that moment is because we are putting expectations on the moment that is not the reality. So we're in a disharmony with the moment. So there has to be some willingness to accept, like radically accept what's going on, even if it really sucks. And that doesn't mean becoming passive. That means I accept what is happening right now, and I'm still committed to getting better. I'm still committed to living an extraordinary life. But you have to relinquish this war, this wrestling match with an invisible opponent of you trying to coerce life, into something that you want when it is not that way. Because if you are constantly trying to make it something different, you are constantly going to be frustrating yourself and creating that suffering, because this is just what is. And wherever you're at right now, it is what is. And that's like perfectly imperfect, and there's a beautiful lesson there, even in a lot of the difficult things, to be willing to accept that and move forward, and not be attached to just making yourself suffer by wishing it a different way.
Whoa, yeah, like I said, he's wise, people. That's what I said. I am so glad we had this conversation. We'll definitely got to do it again sometime, because you have so much more to give. If people want to get to know you better, Steve, where should they be getting in touch with you or finding out what you're up to?
Yeah, I think just simple. The best place is the good old Instagram. I am at Peak Primal Health, Peak Primal Health on Instagram, and there you'll find, all of my ramblings and my writings, and sign up for newsletters and all of that good stuff. So yeah, just come and say hi. And if you listen to this, I always love to connect to people that listen to podcasts. So if you did, I honestly and actively encourage you to get in contact and just let me know a big takeaway from today's call. I would love to strike up a conversation with you. So I'd love to know what resonated.
Oh, yeah. Wouldn't that be great? I hope they do too. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Honestly, this is really comforting for me to speak with someone like you. And I hope that's the same experience my audience has.
And I hope so too. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
All right. I hope you really enjoyed that one, because I know I did. And I wanted to say there is also another book that's really great at this thing we were talking about today on this episode. It's called Feeling Good by David Burns. It's one of the most famous books in psychology ever written. And it helped a loved one of mine get through some incredibly hard, depressive, dark times. And the book really helps you to uncover all of the habitual thinking patterns that you have that are making you feel so crappy. And it's kind of, a big undertaking to do some of the things in the book, but at the same time, some of them are like just waking you up to the things you're doing to yourself, the self-sabotage. And just being aware of it is huge, huge, huge. That's like really a big thing. That's why Steve was talking about being more mindful. I mean, if you don't even know that it's happening, you will never change it. And I think that's a great book to check out. And I also linked to the other books we mentioned. All of that is in the podcast episode description, or the show notes, we always call it. And you can always find the homepage of the show at tinyurl.com/FOW home. FOW, of course, is the Foundation of Wellness. And I hope you enjoyed it. Please share this with someone who can benefit from this message. I know you know someone who needs this message, and it really helps me while you're helping them, because we can grow our listenership and keep making great episodes for you. So thanks for being here. Again, it's me, Marisa, and I hope you have a great, great week. Bye.